Hello and welcome. My name is Jane Duke and I'm Australia's Consul General in Los Angeles. I'm speaking to you today from the Tongva land. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I'm delighted to bring you a unique virtual event today in observation of Australia's 2020 NAIDOC Week. Every year, Australians celebrate the National Aboriginal and Islander Day Observation Committee Week, or NAIDOC Week. During this week, Australians celebrate the history, culture and achievements of Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. This year's theme, Always Was, Always Will Be, recognises that First Nations people have occupied and cared for the Australian continent for over 65,000 years. Today, to talk about what that means and how it relates to Australia's Indigenous people in the United States, we are privileged to bring you a discussion with a very special guest. He's a three-time Olympian and an NBA champion. He's San Antonio Spurs point guard, Mr. Paddy Mills. In basketball, he's done it all. And his commitment to philanthropy and support for his community saw him awarded the 2017 NAIDOC Week Person of the Year. His enormous contributions to Australian culture, sport and community make him an inspiration to us all. Our host for this discussion is Australia's first Indigenous ambassador, Mr. Damian Miller. Damien was Australia's ambassador to Denmark, Iceland and Norway from 2013 to 2017. He now heads communications at Australia's Embassy in Washington, DC. I'm so pleased to have brought these two together for this discussion. But before we turn to their interview, I'd like to invite Australia's ambassador to the United States, Arthur Sinodinos, to say a few words. Ambassador Sinodinos, over to you.
The Australian Embassy, Washington DC and the Australian Consulate General, Los Angeles are proud to host this virtual NAIDOC 2020 event. NAIDOC Week celebrates Australia's First Nations peoples who have occupied and cared for country for over 65,000 years. Australia is a continent crisscrossed by ancient songlines, trade routes and diverse Indigenous cultures, from the Torres Strait Islander peoples in the north to the Palawa peoples in Tasmania and the Yaru people in Broome. Today, NAIDOC is celebrated by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and organisations, Australian local, state and federal governments, the business community and schools across the country. It's a time to reflect on the past, the present and our shared future. Australia, like the United States, loves sport. Our rivalry on the field is robust and we love to support our elite athletes on both sides of the Pacific. So for this year's NAIDOC, we're proud to celebrate Paddy Mills, a trailblazing Australian. He was the first Indigenous Australian to play in the NBA and is a celebrated member of the San Antonio Spurs. He has represented Australia at 3 Olympic Games. In 2017, he was the National NAIDOC Person of the Year. Through his Team Mills Foundation, Paddy is driving a range of social change initiatives in Australia and around the world, which are focused on environmental and wildlife conservation, providing clean drinking water, supporting women and children's shelters, and promoting multiculturalism and Indigenous voices. Indigenous Basketball Australia, another of Paddy's passion projects, is building the basketball skills of Indigenous kids, as well as their fitness, self-esteem, community engagement, and cultural pride. I'm delighted that Paddy will be interviewed by Damian Miller, one of Australia's 100+ Indigenous diplomats and the head of public diplomacy here in Washington. I wish everyone a happy NAIDOC wherever you might be celebrating in Australia or the United States.
My name is Damian Miller. I'm the head of communications at the Australian Embassy in Washington, DC. I'm also a descendant of the Gungaloo people of Central Queensland, and I wanted to acknowledge that I'm on Piscataway land here in Washington, DC.
Patrick Mills. I am a point guard for the San Antonio Spurs, currently in the NBA in the United States. I am a Gugada man from the far west coast of South Australia, and I'm also a Nagyagal and Dawareb Meriam man of the Torres Strait Islands. I would like to pay my respects to all the traditional landowners on which we are right now, virtually around the world, not only in the United States, but in Australia and anywhere else. And pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging as well.
I know there's a lot of interest in your life and your career and your story. And I wanted to kind of share that with everyone a little bit today, if that's okay with you. And my first question was really kind of for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself, your upbringing, and for those who don't know much about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and your own heritage, a little bit about where you're from and who your people are.
I guess I understand how uniquely special I am because of my upbringing and because of my background and my culture, my family's background and culture. So as I like to introduce to people, myself to people for the first time that I meet them, like I said earlier, I'm a Gugger man from the far west coast of South Australia, and I'm also a Nagiagal and Dawarab Meriam man of the Torres Strait Islands. I spent a lot of time in both places growing up as a kid, in particularly the Torres Strait. But no matter where my journey took me, it was essentially my involvement with traditional Meriam dances, songs, and storytelling of the Torres Strait that was really the glue to everything about my culture. And it was probably the fact that it was something that I can just take anywhere with me, no matter where I go. Essentially, I could pack it in my carry-on and away we go, and I was still able to be connected, strongly connected with my culture because of that.
And was that you taught sort of, stories and songs and dance? How was your culture sort of passed on to you?
You can imagine through those traditional dances and storytelling and through language, right? Those dances and what those dances mean, what those dances and songs are talking about, and why we are performing them. There's life and connection to the waters, to the reef, to the sky, to the islands, in all of those dances. So when you perform them, there's a real strong connection of why you're performing them. And as I said, for me, it was the traditional Meriam dances, and that's where my culture and my family is from. So it was only those dances that I would perform. But again, it's always, those lessons that you're taught at such a young age, things like respect, the understanding of community, and how to look after your community, and what you have to do to make your community strong, and doing your part in that sense. So all those core values, I guess, that have come from my culture is things that I still do on a day-to-day basis now.
Can you tell us a little bit about how your Indigenous identity has shaped you as a person? I know you talked about just the importance of how culture has been a sort of guiding force in your life, but just how in your everyday life, as a leader, as a mentor, and also as a sports person, how's that your Indigenous heritage informed who you are?
Yeah, it's a good question, mate, and thanks for asking it. I guess my view on this is that my Indigenous identity is my identity, and that is the core of who I am. I'm a cultured man, and no one can take that away from me. Now, if you say, for example, that my experiences gained along my basketball journey may have helped shape me to who I've become today, but my whole life, I've always been Gugara, Nagiagal, and Dawarab Meriam. I have the belief that, or the vision, I should say, that basketball will come and go, but I'll always be a proud and passionate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander who will continue to practice culture and be able to pass down my knowledge of culture to the next generation and to the next generation.
And also share that wisdom with non-Indigenous people as well, whether it's in Australia or the United States. It's such a gift. I think people don't often realise what a gift our cultures are, and that it's a gift to us, but also to our country, but to the world as well.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that's, you nailed it on the head, is that, this culture that we have is not only to be shared with, the rest of our cultured people, Indigenous people around Australia, but it's there to be able to share with the world. So a part of my journey of being here in the United States, puts me in a position where I can educate people who I really am. Not just an Australian, stereotypical Australians. It's really opened my eyes on how I can educate people on who I really am, and truly grateful for that as well.
You've had a remarkable kind of life journey. I'm intrigued about kind of what some of those turning points were in your life. I know you spent some time in North Queensland and also in Canberra as well. Can you just tell us what were some of those key sort of turning points in your life where you might have thought your life was going in a particular path, but in fact, there were some key things that happened that meant it went on a very different direction?
Look, I always, I know that my culture has always been with me because I've always been a part of it. I've always been around it, whether it's been fishing to, traditional dancing to language and speaking in language and whatnot, involvement with different communities as well. I've always known that that's always been there with me. But when it comes to, I guess, my dreams and my aspirations of what I wanted to do, it was probably realizing at a young age, as a kid, that I wanted to play for Australia so that I could represent my people on the world stage. I wrote that down on a piece of paper. I wrote down my goals and stuck it up on my door in my room, and looked at it every night before I went to sleep. It was the first thing that I looked at when I woke up in the morning to open the door.
Mills catch and shoot for the answer.
And they were just things that I constantly visioned. I always had a good at visioning where and what I wanted to do, and having those written down and pasted on the back of my door, I think helped in a sense. But my journey's still going, still very much going. I'm still, got the desire in me to still develop as an athlete, as a professional athlete. So I would say another key turning point in my journey is right now during this pandemic, and discovering a whole other level of growth as a professional athlete, determination, hunger, and professionalism. And that all comes from, I think, the desire that I have to desperately want to win an Olympic gold medal for my country and for my people.
Oh, wonderful. I mean, you've been an Olympian multiple times, and as you said, you need that vision, you need the dedication, you need the commitment. What's kind of your advice to young people, whether in the United States or Australia, on how they can kind of achieve their goals? And I'm particularly interested in what your advice might be for young Indigenous kids in Australia or the US, or people from minority backgrounds. I know there's a lot of extra hurdles people have to jump through to make it in life. But if you had to give some advice to some young people, what would it be?
What I would say to Indigenous boys and girls back home right now, and that advice I would give is keep the culture alive. Keep the culture alive and celebrate Indigenous excellence. And this starts by never being ashamed of who you are. Really own it, and be proud of it. And for you to have the desire to achieve any dream that you may have, never feeling the need to leave your cultural identity at the door, for you to achieve those dreams that you have, and never letting anyone tell you that you can't achieve something because you are Aboriginal or because you are Torres Strait Islander. For me, my advice would be to look them square in the eye and say, you're bloody right, I am. Now watch me, work my backside off to achieve these dreams. That's how I feel. It's that determination and self-confidence within yourself that I'm proud of who I am, and that's what's going to help me achieve my own dreams.
And thankfully, I'm sure in your world and even in mine, you see a lot of incredible Aboriginal people excelling in every field and being very proud of their identity, knowing who they are, and wanting to kind of succeed for themselves, for their family, for their ancestors as well, and to sort of so there's that real kind of motivation you just see in so many young people, which is very inspiring, actually.
Yeah, exactly, and you get a lot of that connection from from your culture and the land and everything that comes within your culture, your connection to the land, your connection to the water. That's all stuff that inspires me. When I put on the green and gold, that's what I play for. And I think that that's very powerful when you can put that towards what you're working to achieve.
I mean, Paddy, you've been very sort of committed as a sports person to your sport, your profession, but also you have given so much back to the community in Australia and the US. Can you just tell us a little bit about what role sport can play in affecting change? And sport is such a powerful kind of tool, but how do you see it as being a way of bringing change?
Yeah, sports play a massive role in social change, I think, in particularly athletes. I think, it's a massive role. Anyone with a voice and a platform should use that privilege in a positive light to help better the lives of our people and our communities. Because at the end of the day, and I feel strongly about this, at the end of the day, by them doing that, by them inspiring our people, will also inspire and motivate themselves as athletes. So I think it's a massive role, and everyone should hang on to that for sure.
And I just want to ask you about two initiatives that you're leading on at the moment, social change initiatives. And one is you're looking to give young Indigenous Australians an experience in the United States once the COVID restrictions have been lifted and it's possible to travel again. But I understand that you're working with an Australian company and you're wanting to have young Indigenous Australians come to the US, have some work experience and take the skills they learn here back to Australia.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of initiatives that I work on is essentially trying to provide pathways and opportunities for those that aren't accessible to them, whether that is in basketball or outside of basketball. It's always about helping develop and bettering the lives of Indigenous people around Australia. So one partnership is Bluestone Lane, an Australian cafe company over here in the United States. And the program essentially is about developing those skills, people who are in remote communities, who have no experience or no skills in this space, giving them an opportunity to come over to the United States, train, learn those skills, and work in that space. The best thing I think about this program is that because it is hospitality and because you're working in a cafe, you're naturally put in an environment where you can educate people on who you are, on who you really are. And I really think that's the best thing about this program, not only, the training skills and experience, but them being able to really educate people on who they are and their cultural Indigenous identity, which I think is really powerful.
And even in sort of the diplomatic world where I work, there's something really powerful about cultural diplomacy. So sharing for these young people to share a bit of their own culture when they're here in the US, and people-to-people connections are really important as well. So getting to meet and have exchanges and build friendships and dialogue, it's just such an important way of bringing two countries together and two cultures together. So I think it'd be a great thing for not only the young Indigenous kids who'll come over and do this, but also for the Americans who'll meet them and hopefully get their horizons expanded a bit too. Tell us a little bit about another initiative you've been working on in Australia, an organisation called Indigenous Basketball Australia. And I think you've been involved in Indigenous basketball programs that I think your father was involved in, Benny Mills, many, many years ago in Canberra. But you're now putting some energy into developing the next generation of young basketball players. Can you tell us a little bit about IBA and what your vision for that is?
Super excited for this one. This one, really, really passionate and a lot of hard work has been put into this one. But this is it. This is the pinnacle for Indigenous basketball in the whole country. You know, the way that we're operating, the way that we are delivering programs. It's a starting level and it's only going to grow. But basically, we're delivering programs again to be able to create pathways and opportunities for Indigenous kids in places where the mainstream system that's there right now just doesn't work for these kids. So we're opening pathways and opportunities for that. But you know, as basketball is this vehicle, we're also being able to capacity build the community with their involvement, so that you can create a sense of ownership, something that they feel like they're a part of, that they actually own. And that's what Indigenous Basketball Australia is. It's much more than the basketball aspect of this. And I think at the end of the day, basketball is just the vehicle. But you know, to be able to get these kids and these people off of the streets or off of a bad place into something that they feel like they're a part of and that they own is important. But Indigenous Basketball Australia, it really is the pinnacle for Indigenous basketball, and the vision is that you know, there will be a direct pathway from IBA all the way to college and MBA, and we'll have people coming from around the world to our programs, to our leagues, to our tournaments. You know, identifying our talent that just hasn't been there in the past. So all of this has come from, I guess, the basketball environment that I grew up in, and that was Shadows basketball that you know, my parents along with others had started. And I will mention as well that the other most important thing other than basketball is the cultural aspect to it. And again, back to my advice to these young people is about keeping the culture alive. So that's a heavy aspect of IBA, is making sure these kids understand you know, who they are, who they represent, so that when they put on their you know, IBA jersey and they know what region they're representing, that they do it with a whole lot of pride. And it's probably something that I've never had the opportunity to do, specifically represent Indigenous Australia. So I'm really excited for the young kids to be able to have that opportunity.
Well, how wonderful for you, but also for these young kids. And because, as you said, sport it's great for its own sake. It's something fun. It's good for young people's health, for their mental health and their physical health. But also, as you said, it can help young kids build their confidence, can bring communities together. It's really such an important kind of glue in our community as well, in the Indigenous community, but in the broader Australian and American community too. So, yeah, it ticks so many important boxes. I was just going to ask you about NAIDOC, the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Day Observance Committee. It's a mouthful, I know, but you were named Person of the Year in 2017, and I know that's something that I'm sure is incredibly a source of great pride for you and for your family and your community. But can you just tell me kind of what an award like that means to you and to your family, your community? It's so good to be honoured by your own Indigenous community.
This NAIDOC award in 2007 was very unique, and I think it hit me a lot differently than a lot of other awards that I've you know, been fortunate enough to win over my career. So it's funny that you bring it up, because it really did mean so much to me, because it wasn't a sports award. It was an acknowledgement for all the work I do for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which at the end of the day is far greater than basketball. So it was satisfying for me to know that my work outside of basketball was being recognized. It was a special time. It was in Cairns. I remember I was unable to go, but my parents had flown up to Cairns to be there, present at the NAIDOC ball, and my dad accepted the award and went up on stage. So yeah, like I said, this one I have very vivid memories of you know, that whole experience and exchange, and when I found out, because it really was special, that one. Yeah.
And one final question, that's an important question for all of us, I suppose, is what legacy would you like to kind of leave in Australia, but also the United States as well?
You know, it's not something that I really think of on a day-to-day basis. You know, I kind of put my head down and focus on the things that I need to do, and whatever comes out will come out. But I guess if I was to answer that as an athlete, I guess first, I want to be the best Australian basketball player ever. I believe that I am that right now, and I'm hungrier than ever for an Olympic gold medal in Tokyo. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to impact and influence all Indigenous people around the world. And if I'm able to carry myself the way I do, and the way I've been taught for so many years from my parents, from my family, from my friends, all with that traditional cultural background and knowledge of upbringing and what it all means. I think I can have that influence on people. And the reason I say that is because I've felt that feedback from people, from other Indigenous people in other countries. And that was a big eye opener for me to, and really inspired me, I guess, to keep on doing what I am doing. So I guess that's where all this determination and motivation comes from, is that positive feedback that I get from people, not only in Australia, but around the world. So I'm very, very passionate about, making an impact on people and making a positive influence on them that hopefully one day can help them achieve whatever they're after.
Fantastic, Paddy. Thank you so much for speaking to us today. And thanks for your time. It's a real privilege to talk to you about these things which are so close to your heart. And I'm sure there's, some of the really important things you've said to the Indigenous community back in Australia, but also around the world. It will really kind of resonate with so many of us. And finally, I just want to say happy NAIDOC week, and hope you can celebrate well, and you'll be thinking of your communities back home in Australia and the Torres Strait. Thanks again.
Happy NAIDOC week. Always was, always will be. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Damien. Thanks, Paddy. That was truly inspiring. Paddy, to hear you speak so openly about your heritage, your family, your community, and your motivations was a real privilege. You've shared such a powerful, positive message, and your ambition to make a difference and represent your people and your country makes us all very proud. We wish you all the very best in your initiatives to support young Indigenous Australians and for your continued journey in the United States and on the world stage. He's looking forward to that gold medal for Australia at the next Olympics. Thank you.